It was purely luck at the outset. I remember very well just how it happened. I was on my way over to Boston to see my brother, but incidental to the journey made a trip to Cleveland. Traveling on the same train with me was J.B. Ford Jr., the son of Edward Ford. We got into a conversation about Detroit, and after we had chatted a while, he asked me if I knew of a good piece of land where I might build an office building. I had for some time had in mind the property at the northwest corner of Griswold and Congress Streets, and in fact for years held the ambition to see a fine office structure on the site for the reason that my office was there and it was my business home for many years. I really considered it the ideal location for an office building, and I told Mr. Ford that I believed it the logical place for the greatest office building in the city. William W. Hannon. Edward Ford was born on January 21, 1843 in Greenville, Indiana. He was the oldest son of John Baptiste Ford, who at the time ran a dry goods store and a flour mill, but was about to strike it rich by winning huge government contracts to supply the United States cavalry during the Mexican-American War. The elder Ford went on to establish a boat work at New Albany, Indiana, and the success of that business earned him the moniker Captain J.B. Ford. After the war, Ford and his son Edward entered the iron business and supplied the Union forces with the raw metal. It was about this time that Ford and his boys would start experimenting with plate glass, and it was in this industry where they would make their fortunes. In 1883, Captain Ford, Edward, and Edward's younger brother Emery started J.B. Ford & Sons, a company dedicated to producing high-quality plate glass. Shortly after this company became what is now Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, or better known as PPG. In 1887, in a small town 40 miles northeast of Pittsburgh, Captain J.B. Ford established PPG's largest plate glass manufacturing facility, Works No. 3 Glass Factory, and in its heyday employed over 5,000 workers. The city was named after the captain and is now known as Ford City, Pennsylvania. The townsfolk even erected a statue in his honor. In 1898, after becoming disillusioned with the organization and operation of his partners at PPG, Edward Ford purchased 173 acres of farmland on the Maumee River in Ohio to build his plate glass factory. In August of that year, the Edward Ford Plate Glass Company began operations. By 1905, Ford wrote with pride that the factory included a casting department containing 7 large 20-pot furnaces. Next to the furnaces was the lair building, followed by the grinding room with 25 grinding machines. Adjoining this was the polishing department containing 18 polishing machines. Ford purchased more acreage and constructed a second plant, which began operation later in the decade. The Edward Ford family was now prospering and built their majestic home, Greystone, on the banks of the Maumee. It was at this time that Detroit real estate magnate William W. Hannon encountered J.B. Ford Jr., Edward's older son, and pitched the idea of building an office building in Detroit. The Fords at first decided to build their structure in Toledo, but were dismayed by the local landowners driving up the cost of real estate once they learned who was preparing to build. This, along with Ford's newly established alkali factories in Wyandotte, Michigan, made the booming city of Detroit the perfect place to build. After purchasing the property on the corner of Griswold and Congress, Ford hired renowned Chicago architect Daniel Burnham, who not only was the mind and planner behind the rebuilding of Chicago after the Great Fire of 1871, but also was responsible for the amazing architecture of the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. Leveraging on the spirit of the popularity of the White City, Burnham decided to design the Ford building in the spirit of similar buildings such as his Railway Exchange building in Chicago and his Flatiron building in New York City. White, shiny terracotta finish with classical features would be the Chicago-style dressing of the magnificent Ford building. Construction of the Ford building began in January 1907 and continued for the next 24 months. The March 8, 1909 Detroit News wrote, "To say that Detroiters are proud of this magnificent building and that it has been more talked about than any other structure ever built in the city is no exaggeration." Since about 2 years ago, when Mr. Ford came up from Toledo and purchased the ground at Griswold and Congress Streets, then covered with dilapidated old landmarks, the public has taken that gentleman into partnership, and while it has been his capital and his enterprise that has made this construction possible, the average citizen has felt almost as much interest in the completion of the structure as its owner has. The exterior of the building is of stone and terracotta, and the interior finished throughout in mahogany and white marble. The hallways and corridors above the first floor are coated in white marble 7 stories high, and every office is especially equipped with prism glass windows to the corridors. The height at the street level to the roof is 250 feet, and there are 19 stories above the sidewalk. To the tip of the flagpole is 310 feet from street level. Once the tallest building in Detroit, the Ford building has seen its height dominated by the booming construction of the city over the years. Buildings such as the Buell, the Guardian, and the Penobscot have since cast a shadow over the Ford, but its elegance on the northwest corner of Griswold and Congress will never be obscured. As the years have passed and the building has aged, there have been several concepts proposed to modernize the look of the building, and indeed the interior over the years has been updated since construction. After Edward Ford's death in 1920, George Ross Ford and J.B. Ford Jr. were among those who either owned or managed the building until the family stepped away in 1963. Since then, there have been several owners over the years, but its current owner, Tom Paglia, has taken great pride in maintaining the Ford and retaining its place as a stately reminder of Detroit's golden years.
I cherish the fact that I have been the caretaker or the captain of this ship for the past 18 years, and it has been my hope that I may be able to turn the keys to this vessel over to my children, and they will continue sailing the ship as I have in the past. Part of that, however, depends upon the continued viability of the downtown community. Right now, we are definitely at the lowest of lows that I've seen in my lifetime. Nothing related to strictly just downtown, but the automotive community and many other general economic factors that have affected not just the country but the world. Well, I love Detroit, and me, like a lot of others, are hopeful that Detroit will eventually make a turnaround. As far as the job is concerned, I've had more fun doing this job than any other job I've had in my life.